everybody, this is Kyla again from the Conservancy for Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Today we are here at the Cuyahoga River in the middle of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park to talk a little bit about the history of the river and kind of continue what we were talking about last week with our first live stream. So if you remember last week, if you did not have a chance to watch that live stream, you can look at any of our social media outlets or also check the resources page on our website. When we talked last week, we were talking about a watershed, which you might remember is an area of land that all drains to a common body of water, like this body of water right here in front of us, the Cuyahoga River. So what we're going to be doing today is actually performing two tests that we would perform during our programming with kids during a program called Journey to the River to determine how healthy the Cuyahoga River is. You might remember when we talked about watersheds that we talked about land use and how different types of land use can affect our waterways and how healthy they are. So when we think about the history of the Cuyahoga River, we can think back 50 years, even more than 50 years ago, right? Along the banks of the Cuyahoga River, we had the cities of Akron and Cleveland. And those cities were very industrial cities. There were factories all along the banks of the Cuyahoga River. And that kind of land use led to a lot of pollution in the Cuyahoga River. But now, in 2020, we have less industrialism along the banks of the river, and there's different uses of lands that might be affecting this river. So we're going to take a look at our testing equipment and see today if we can determine how healthy or unhealthy the Cuyahoga River is. So since the 1950s, people have started moving out of the cities, and they've started to develop land that used to be forests, wetlands, and meadows. These areas where water can soak into the ground. But as people are moving out of the cities, building these homes, building these stores, right? We are losing those permeable surfaces where water can soak into the ground. And that means that we have an increase in runoff. That is a term that you might remember from our video last week, but we can review what it means. It just means water that flows over the ground, but does not soak in until it ends up in a body of water like the Cuyahoga River here. So when you think about water flowing over the ground but not soaking in, do you think that it might be picking some things up? It definitely does, and one of the things that it picks up is dirt. So we have this turbidity tube here, and this is one of our tests that we do with students at the EEC when they do our program Journey to the River. So I'm going to take my collection device and get some water out of the river, and we will begin our test. So as a community scientist, before I begin my test, I have to make sure that I have the proper equipment on so that I am being safe. So I'm going to make sure that I've got my eyeglasses on and then also my gloves. Turbidity is a test that measures how clear the water is. So when we're talking about runoff and water picking up dirt and depositing it in the river, we're talking about particles of sediment that are suspended in the water and not dissolving in the water. So this test is really simple. You fill up this tube here and there is a black and white disc at the bottom called a Secchi disc. So it might look kind of clear to you from this perspective, but if I put my eye right here and look down into the tube, I can't see that black and white disc. So I'm going to slowly start releasing water by pressing down and keeping my eye right here so that I can see when I can see the disc. All right, so I am finally able to see the black and white disc at the bottom of this tube. We would complete this test by taking a look here and seeing what measurement of NTUs that we are at. But what I want to revisit is why it might be important for a river to have clear water. So we were talking about fish and little tiny macroinvertebrates that are on the bottom of a river. A clear river makes for a better habitat for those kinds of animals because they are able to see what they are going to eat, right? So if you're a fish, maybe swimming around in the Cuyahoga River, looking for your dinner, you're looking for something like a dragonfly larva, and you're not going to be able to see that if there's so much dirt in the water that your vision is cloudy, right? So clear water is really, really important for those smaller things that provide food for bigger animals that are part of the river system. The second test that we're going to talk about today is the dissolved oxygen test. So this is a test to tell how much oxygen is dissolved in the river. When you think about oxygen, that's something that we all need to survive. But other organisms that live in the river also need it to survive. So fish have gills that they use to extract oxygen. Macroinvertebrates also need oxygen to live. So it's a really important part of a river system. So I have put two tablets here in this little vial. They're chemical tablets that are going to start to slowly change the color of the water. And then later, I'm going to be able to take a look at a color chart, compare the color that my vial has changed, to that chart, and it's going to tell me how many parts per million. So out of 1 million things that make up one little droplet of water, how many of those are oxygen molecules? So as I'm waiting for my dissolved oxygen tablets to dissolve, as I am inverting instead of shaking, right? As we're waiting for these to dissolve, I want to talk a little bit about why we at the Conservancy for the Cuyahoga Valley National Park are really concerned with water quality testing. It's part of a legacy that we are upholding because the Cuyahoga River has actually burned more than 10 times. So this happened for the very last time, almost 51 years ago this year, and it was because there was so much pollution from that land use that we talked about earlier. When we test the river now, we're trying to figure out how well the river has recovered from those times. So when I'm testing for things, especially dissolved oxygen, when the river burned for the very last time, scientists tested the amounts of dissolved oxygen in the Cuyahoga River up by Cleveland, and there was 0% dissolved oxygen in the river. So what does that mean for a river system? Do you think that anything can live in a river that has 0% dissolved oxygen in it? Not quite. So if we get more than 0% today, which we certainly will, we will know that our river has really rebounded in those 50 years since the last fire. So as I'm cleaning up from our tests that we've done today, I just want to revisit a couple of the things that we talked about. As our dissolved oxygen levels have increased, and so has the turbidity levels of the Cuyahoga River, a lot of really neat things have started to happen. We see fish populations rising, and that means that species like bald eagles can return to the Cuyahoga Valley. We also have really cool things like beavers and otters in this park that use this river as a source of food and as a means of transportation. When we're thinking about the Cuyahoga River, we did 2 different kinds of tests today. We did our dissolved oxygen test and our turbidity test. And those are chemical tests that you can do, but the most foundational part of science is just using your observational skills. So as a citizen scientist down here at the Cuyahoga River, I'm going to take a look and I'm going to start noticing what's around me. So I'm going to be noticing what I hear, what kinds of maybe different species of birds I'm hearing, or how fast the water is moving. I'm going to notice what I smell, what I see, and that's going to tell me a little bit about the health of this river. So I would encourage you to take a step outside today, get some fresh air, and notice what's going on around you. Use those observational skills as a community scientist. Spring is starting to happen. Do you see any changes that are occurring seasonally? Do you notice any neat animals in your backyard? I would love for you to let us know in the comments what you found when you were outside observing. We are so grateful that you joined us for another video here. Keep tuned to our social media outlets for our next video, and have a great day.